In the spirit of Halloween this year, we've got a special episode for you today, filled with ghost stories, haunted hoodoo boxes, and historical events. Today on City Chat. Firefighter Christ Klein, also known as the Columbus Fire Department's unofficial historian, is here to tell us about some of these historical ghost stories of the Columbus Fire Department. Thank you, Firefighter Christ Klein, for coming onto the show today. We're so excited to hear all of these ghost stories that you have for us.
It's good to be here.
I've heard that you've been called the unofficial historian of the fire department. Do you want to just talk a little bit about your passion and why they call you this?
Yeah, I'm not the official. We have an official fire department historian. I work along with them all the time. I find the goofy, the weird stuff that they don't have time to look for, and I just kind of have a knack for finding odd and strange things.
So, we have four stories. We have four stories here that you are going to tell us. I am not going to lie. All the pictures that I was getting, I was just like, oh my gosh, like all of these historical photos and like all of your findings, they're just, it's amazing all of the research that you've done. And I was kind of scared that like my email was going to be haunted or something.
Yeah, well, I joke and say I talk to dead firemen. It's not like I hear voices or anything like that, but the way I find things is really unusual, and I always feel like there's a reason for it. Yeah. So if they're using me to get their story out, then they're kind of using you too. So sorry you're haunted.
Oh, yay. So let's first start off with the Hoodoo Box and how that kind of ties into the story of Thomas Davis.
Okay. The Hoodoo Box is the story I found. It was very common years and years ago, decades ago. There was a fire alarm box at Long and High, and oddly enough, it was number 313. And fire alarm boxes were the main way people would call 911 back in the day. Prior to that, you would run to the firehouse and they would ring church bells in a certain sequence, and all the firemen would know at least the general direction to go for the fire. But once they invented the telegraph, that enabled them to invent the fire alarm box. So they put them throughout the city, and they nicknamed it the Hoodoo Box. Now I had to look up the word hoodoo, and it turns out that means like a curse or a jinx, and it's usually associated with the number 13. So it's no surprise box 313 became the cursed box. But they had plenty of reason to call it the cursed box. It started out with just an unusually high amount of big fires right at that intersection. I mean, it's a big area of downtown, but some of the accidents were just kind of freaky. What got really scary is we started losing firefighters responding, and there's about 4 of them now that have died responding specifically to box 313. The first one was a captain, Daniel Lewis. He was the very first hoodoo victim, April 26, 1903. He showed up to what was the Union Clothing Department and the Botts Brothers Billiard Hall. And the building's still there. It's not as tall anymore because they burned half of it down. But he went in there. It was a big fire, people jumping out of windows, throwing their belongings out of windows. And the captain went in with 2 other firemen, and at one point he sent them out to pull more hose. That's a common thing. You can never have enough hose on a fire. But as soon as he sent them out, the building collapsed and he perished in that fire. He was a very well-liked guy, and the city just, went out of their way, and the citizens to get him, his house paid off, because we really didn't have a death fund or a benevolent fund at that time. But he was the very first one. But that wasn't enough to consider it cursed at the time. Right. But it didn't take long before the next guy, another captain, Charles Garrett, he was responding July 1922 to box 313 at Long and High. And he was involved in a pretty serious vehicle accident between his chief's buggy and some citizens. And I don't think any of the citizens died in that wreck, but Captain Garrett died. So that's all it took. Now, firemen were pretty superstitious anyway.
Yeah.
I think that's probably about the time it started getting a little questionable. Maybe we better be careful going to this place. But again, just strange accidents. One of the fire department's prize horses was sitting there at the scene at box 313, and a coal wagon came around the corner and ran in and hit the horse and cut his neck. And the newspaper articles are pretty graphic, describing the blood squirting out of the horse's neck and the rush to get the vet there to save the horse. I think they saved the horse, but just a horse with its neck cut open and bleeding all over High Street, that just added to the mystique of this little alarm box here.
Yeah.
So the next one after that, it's pretty graphic too. It was a fireman. He was riding on the back of one of the wagons responding to box 313. That was January 1924. And they had to make a sudden stop. And the fire wagon behind them ran into his wagon, basically amputating his legs off. But they thought he would make it. They thought he would live. And the newspaper said that. And then it was just kind of odd because, again, the newspapers were pretty honest back then. They pretty much said he was going to die. And he did. The poor guy died. So he was another victim of the Hoodoo Box. And then the very last one, this one's would be shocking to the guys in the fire department because everybody knows the story of this next fireman that died, but hardly any of them know about the Hoodoo Box. I mean, it was so well known decades ago, it's just gotten lost. And the next one was John Nance from Station 2. And that happened in July 25th, 1987. It would have been the building right next door. And there's still firemen on the department, firefighters on the department that responded to this one. And it's still an open wound with a lot of guys. But firefighter Nance went into the building and fell through a hole in the floor. And he was conscious, but the room was full of smoke. They couldn't get him out. He couldn't crawl back out of the hole that he fell through. And they tried in vain, just heroically, just the stories are incredible of how they went in there and tried to cut the floor open and make the hole bigger. But the saws wouldn't run because there was no oxygen. And so unfortunately, firefighter Nance died, and he was the last fireman to die so far. Hopefully that's the end of the Hoodoo Box curse.
Yeah.
But
and I think
the guys, when they find that out, they'll hopefully, and I guess my thing is, I don't believe ghosts would, they're not there to scare you or to torture you, but I do believe they're trying to tell us something.
Yeah.
That's why I find all these stories. And maybe they're just trying to say, hey, be careful here. Mm-hmm. This is a dangerous spot.
That's really interesting. That's really intense. And I'm not sure if it was this specific story, the John Nance story, but if because of his accident, was there something that was developed from that?
Yes,
like oxygen?
yes.
Okay. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
So if you think about it, if you fall head first through a small opening, you just can't get right back out of that opening as easy unless you come straight out.
Yeah.
Well, once you put a ladder down in that hole, now the hole's even smaller. So as a result of that, and we learn something from every tragic loss of life for a firefighter. And for John Nance, they developed a knot. It was called the Handcuff Knot or the Love Knot, but the John Nance knot. It's just it's a cinching knot. So you basically put the loops around their wrists or feet, and even if they're unconscious, you can pull them straight up like a needle, straight out of the hole. So even if you can't make the hole any bigger, this specific knot, the way it's designed, will take them straight out. And that was the result. And, they teach firefighters all over the country the Nance knot now.
That's so cool. That's really amazing. The Hoodoo Box, is it still there?
No.
It's not.
No, they did away with the alarm boxes. The first ones worked off the telegraph system. And the firemen were in charge of the telegraph system. They maintained the wires and the alarm boxes themselves. and it was a really dangerous job. They still fought fire, but they were also called linemen. And we've lost several firefighters falling or being electrocuted working on the alarm boxes. But with the invention of the telephone, we just gotten away from it. They're not that accurate. Someone can pull it and you don't know
Yeah.
if the fire's there or a half a block down the street. But for their time, they were a great invention. Ringing bells not only sent the fire department, but it sent darn near everybody within a mile. They would interfere with the firefighting, literally telling firemen what to do and how to do it and getting in their way. And so when they came up with these fire alarm boxes, it was a great improvement. Folks would still find their way, but just not as many.
Yeah.
And now we just rely on so many other things, 911, cell phones. But it was a great invention when it happened.
And how does this tie in with the Thomas Whitey Davis story?
The Whitey Davis story is unique. I was doing research, not looking for anything specific, but this article popped up and it mentioned the word occult in the fire department. Again, I had to kind of look that up because that's a scary word, but it basically means anything to do with the supernatural. And it described the supernatural powers of a fireman named Whitey Davis. And the article describes how his powers are well known. He responded with a reporter to a girl that had been burnt, severely burnt. And they described how he put his hands on the little girl, and she was crying and screaming in extreme pain, and said he muttered some guttural words in her ear, and just her pain just disappeared. And back then, the doctor would show up at the scene, and by the time the doctor got there, he said, "There's no treatment needed. She's okay to be left alone." So. But the same article talked about his supernatural powers and how he himself had fallen off of a wagon responding to a fire and it ran over him. And then he basically popped right back up and went back to work.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. And, the chief confirmed, his powers are well known, and, he's always healing injured firemen, and, just he mutters some words, and, it just seemed to miraculously heal these people. But if that's not enough to convince you, Whitey Davis was a lineman, and he fell not once, but twice, 35 feet one time, and about a month later, another 42 feet off of one of these telegraph poles. One newspaper article described how he left an indention in the ground. These things would kill just about anybody, and he did it twice. So, yeah, it's very interesting to read about him. He was a fireman for a long time, and then he retired and became a police officer for a long time. But he died young. I think he was around 50-ish. But he survived all these things. Yeah. There were stories where one of the big fires, oddly enough, where the Hoodoo Box, a big fire, where they couldn't find him. They couldn't find two of them. And he came out of that alive. So, he's just an interesting fellow. I still can't find a picture of him. I'm still trying. But, yeah, there was something to it. He definitely had some supernatural powers.
That's so cool. Let's move on to the butcher shop story, and then we'll do the ghost of Paul Altenbach last. Okay.
There was a gentleman that ran as some firemen at one of the grocery stores. He told them that he had a grandfather and a great-grandfather that were both on the Columbus Fire Department in the 1900s. And he asked if they knew who he could get some more information, and they gave him my phone number. He contacted me, and I don't mind doing it. I started doing some research, and the name he gave me rang a bell, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But about 7-8 years prior, I found this article, and this is the beginning of this story. It's a fireman. His name was Hardy Saunders. He was married, and he had a child, about a 1-year-old child, and he wasn't getting along with his wife. They were talking divorce, and he went home from the firehouse one day, really upset, she was staying with her father, his father-in-law. He showed up over there trying to get her to, come back and don't leave and let's not get a divorce. And it got ugly and some pushing and shoving. And Saunders pulls out a gun and not only shoots his wife while she's holding his infant son, but he shoots and kills his father-in-law. And she survived
his wife did survive, right?
Yeah, she did survive. It was touch and go for a little bit. But, I would say probably a week later, an article showed up that they think she was going to be okay. The father-in-law, he died pretty quickly. So, I found articles talking about the court case. They charged him with first degree murder. He tried to plead insanity. It didn't work because he was eventually found guilty. I think I've had that date. Yeah, June 9th, 1921 is when he was found guilty, sentenced to life in prison. And that's the story I saw. But I thought that was an interesting story.
Yeah.
But it was when I was researching this other name, which is Ryerson. Again, where did I hear that name? And it turns out this guy that talked to my friends, he's distantly related to the Ryersons and to the Saunders because it was Hardy Saunders' wife was Florence Ryerson. Okay, so he's in jail for life.
Yeah.
I thought that was the end of the story, but once I started researching again, I get this great little article about this couple. 17 years later, after he went to jail for life, they met and rekindled their love and got remarried. And it was Hardy Saunders and Florence Ryerson. It doesn't mention the shooting, the murder, any of that. The life sentence, I don't know how he got out of jail, but however it turned out, he got out of jail and they remarried, and they had a nice little grocery store / butcher shop. The next article I found, they had a nice little successful butcher shop, and they just kind of lived happily ever after.
Interesting.
And and oddly enough, his name was Joseph, the one that almost got killed in the scuffle, ended up growing up to becoming a fireman also for Columbus for a short time.
That's so crazy. And he went by Joseph Saunders then?
Yeah, that would be the son, that almost died.
So interesting. And it's just crazy how, I don't think anybody would have, figured out that someone, got off of a life sentence. You know what I mean? It's just
right.
Weird that
and no one but me would have put the two and two together. Yeah. I'm literally the only person in the world that would have heard that and remembered that name sounds familiar. But, again, I don't know what Hardy Saunders is trying to tell me. Maybe he's trying to say, hey, I'm not a murderer. I loved my wife. I don't know. Who knows? But I always think there's something they're trying to tell us. I try to look at the positive stuff.
Maybe the criminal justice system. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. I mean, this guy came out. He was apparently a good husband, good father, and a productive person in society. So I don't know, but it would be a different story if he never got out. So.
Yeah, that's so crazy. And lastly, the ghost of Paul Altenbach.
Yeah, this is another interesting one of many. Okay, this story starts at the City Ice and Fuel Company on East Main Street.
Okay. And
this is back in 1929. There were two brothers that worked at the company, Esta and, it's kind of unusual, Esta and Leonard Mock. And the Mock brothers worked there, and they know that when this specific piece of equipment was not running, they would have to go down in kind of a well and flip a switch or do some work to get it running again. Well, Leonard Mock showed up for work one day, and he could not find his brother, Esta, and whatever the equipment was not running. So he went over to the well to fix the equipment, and he could see Esta kind of down there in the well, unconscious. And it had a ladder, so he started down the ladder to rescue his brother, and he got lightheaded. And he knew right away, oh, there's something in here. So he managed to barely get out of the hole himself. but they called the fire department, and we showed up. And at the time, the fire department, they were using more like a kind of a mask that they used in World War like one, kind of a chemical mask. It was a little box with a hose. It worked for some chemicals, but others it didn't work for. But they weren't sure, because we're the fire department, we weren't the military. It worked most of the time. So he put his mask on. He did what he could, and Paul Altenbach was the fireman chosen to go down in the hole. So they tied a rope around him, around his waist. He put his mask on, and he started down the hole. Well, he got about halfway down, and he went unconscious, and he fell backwards, which caused his arms to raise up, and the rope slipped off, and down he went. So they ended up dying of they called it the black and damp, which is like a coal miner's term for a certain combination of nitrogen and some other carbon monoxide. But so they got him out, and unfortunately Leonard Mock and Paul Altenbach passed away. And out of that tragedy, like I said, that's when the fire department decided to go to the more modern version for that day of a self-contained breathing apparatus, which is more like what we use today. But they just as easily could have developed that Nance knot, had he had the proper breathing equipment, and their concern was the rope slipping off. Maybe they would have developed a cinching knot that would have prevented him from falling, even if he was unconscious. So, but that, like I said, we always learn something, and that's the one we learned from that story. I thought that was a really interesting story itself, but as I researched it more, back in 2006, like a catering supply company ended up in that building where it happened on East Main Street. And they had a nice little article how they had done some work on the outside of the building at their loading dock and uncovered this large well or cistern. And ever since they did that, they were hearing noises, footsteps, voices. The elevator would run on its own. And someone there did the research and found out that the fireman died there. And I actually talked to him.
Like two people died there, though, right? Because one of
the
mock brothers.
Right, but they only heard of the fireman. And so when I talked to her, she said, sure enough, she said, we always hear things. It's the craziest thing. They had a nickname for him, but she said, I believe it's a fireman. And I just told her the story, and I said, well, it could be, the guy that worked there. It could be a fireman. Ask him next time you see him. Maybe they'll tell you. But but it was kind of an interesting story, and that's another ghost story.
Yeah. Did she tell you like what he does, like the ghost, like what?
She specifically said she had heard the footsteps, and the elevator would run all by itself.
Oh my God.
Yeah. But the article it talked about, it gave like 6 or 7 employees different stories of seeing something move or hearing a voice and nothing was there. They all had their own little story, and it all started once they uncovered this well. And
wow.
So I don't know if it's Esther or Leonard Mock or Altenbach, or I'm just not sure, but it's a little weird.
Yeah, that's so crazy. I wonder like what that ghost is trying to do, or like where they go, like if he's like in misery right now, like just kind of like stuck.
Yeah, or maybe he's trying to tell him stay the hell away from the well. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you so much, Firefighter Klein, for like telling us all of these stories. They're so interesting, and they're so like historically filled with so much content. It's great.
You're very welcome, and just be careful if you're hanging around long and high.
I'm Josie Smith. Thanks for watching City Chat on CTV.